In the 1930s, Americans went through what some call the hardest time in America. They went through the Great Depression. The Depression started when the stock market crashed in the late 1920s, early 1930s. Most people had invested thousands into the stock market and were crushed when it went bad. People lost thousands and even some people's life savings. After the crash, banks started to close, so people became frantic to get whatever money they had left out of the banks. This graph shows the unemployment, and as you can see, the 1930s had over 20% of unemployment, all because of the Depression and how places were closing because people weren't buying anything. This second graph shows the number of banks that we had before and during the Depression. For example, in 1929 we had over 25,000 banks, and in 1933 we barely had 15,000. And in the third and final graph it shows that the bank closures grow over time, and for example in 1925 a little over 500 were gone, and then by 1933 it's up to at least 4,000 bank closures. The downside is banks didn't have enough money that people were demanding, so they began to repossess homes from people who hadn't fully paid them back. As banks closed, so did businesses. Not all closed, but if they didn't close, they laid off a good amount of people.
Please, sir, spare some change. I'm so hungry. So very hungry, sir. I haven't worked for 3 months. I'm dying here, dude.
Henry Ford, for example, did close some factories, but not all. Closing of several Detroit factories made for nearly 75,000 jobless people.
I'm allowed to take that from you.
No, you're not.
Yeah, I am. I'm in the bank. I do what I
Straight
want.
off, dude.
I booked the ball.
Oh, man. You took it. What am I going to do now?
It's like, split candy.
Yeah.
10 cents, please. I need the money for my starving children. We have no food. We lost our home.
As the Depression got worse, jobs became fewer and fewer, and people resorted to selling apples for 5 cents on the side of the street.
Trash, so I can find some stuff to sell because I don't got any money. Look at that, it's empty. Wow.
The president at the time, Herbert Hoover, took the idea of laissez-faire. Laissez-faire is the idea that the government should stay out of it and that everyone was to fend for themselves. The government did not do very much except for one thing. They raised the tax on foreign items so Americans would resort to buying the cheaper American brand. This made for international problems. The U.S. began a ripple effect. They helped destroy what international trade they had then. Germany seized the reparation payments, and the U.S. suspended France and Great Britain's war debt payments. Farmers also had a rough time with the Depression. They began not to sell crops and to have a surplus of food that went to waste. At the end of Herbert Hoover's presidency in 1933, a man named Franklin D. Roosevelt came in and set up the New Deal, which gave Americans hope that one day the U.S. could finally pull out of this depression.